This is our mini series on cross-border considerations with Raymond James, where we talk about things that Canadians need to know when you've got money or family on both sides of the border. And to do that, we've got Darren Coleman. He's Senior Portfolio Manager at Portage Wealth, part of Raymond James. Darren, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So there's a lot of issues that come up when you've got these cross-border considerations. One of the most common issues I imagine that you deal with in your practice is somebody who's moving to Canada, either for the first time or they're Canadian that lived in the US and they're coming back. What are some of the issues that crop up?
Yeah, you're right. We do see that a lot. Either it's a Canadian who spent a chunk of their working career in the United States returning home, or someone who's moving up to Canada, either for a job opportunity or maybe for love. And what they discover when they get here is that while their phone may work in both countries, and we watch a lot of the same TV shows, they're very different legal, tax, compliance, and financial systems. And they often discover that things don't work as easily as they thought they would.
What are some of the first steps that you should take to help understand how best to navigate this situation?
Yeah, getting clarity on how difficult it is often the first thing. Usually when people come to us, they've already kind of discovered that this was harder than they expected. One of the things that tends to cause the greatest amount of challenge is the fact that financial institutions are generally only allowed to deal with people that are in the same jurisdiction. So if you've got your money in one country and you've moved to the other, you'll find it very hard to get someone to actually talk to you about what to do. And we very frequently see that when people do with their retirement accounts. So if it's someone who's worked in the United States and they're coming back to Canada, they may discover that when they tell their US financial institution to change their address on their IRA, for example, which is like a Canadian RRSP, to a Canadian address, they'll discover they're going to get a letter at some point that says your account is frozen and you can maybe only do transactions to sell. They also may get a letter that says they're going to get a check, less taxes and penalties, because that financial institution doesn't want to deal with them any longer.
So then I guess it's really important to be with a financial institution that's recognized on both sides of the border.
Yeah, and very few do actually. It makes sense because this is a big problem, but I would say for a relatively small number of people. So if you're a large financial institution, it's probably easier to just raise your fees on a credit card or a safety deposit box rather than get into the complexities of having a full financial engine that works in both countries.
Let's talk about a situation where you're from Canada and you're going to the US, but you probably have a bunch of investment products, whether they're an RRSP, an RESP. They don't have those in the US.
They don't.
What do you do?
Well, getting an audit, if you will, or an inventory of what exactly the accounts you have are and which ones can you keep while you're in the United States. Some of them are fine. They're covered under the US tax treaty, like an RSP, for example. Those are fine to leave them unless you go to certain states, because not all states follow the Canada tax treaty with respect to state tax. So the most popular example of that would be California. So if you're moving to California, California does not recognize the tax deferral of an RSP. There's a few steps you want to take before you go. Other states, not really an issue. So knowing where you're going and getting some good advice before you leave is really important. Other account types aren't recognized at all, or the tax treaty is completely silent. So for example, the newest one, the first home savings account, is not recognized at all by the IRS. So if you've already set one of those things up, you may not want to have it when you go to the US. So having a good conversation with an advisor that knows about these things is really important before you go.
What about a TFSA?
That's a tricky one. So some tax advisors take the perspective that they believe it should have the same tax deferral as a Roth IRA, which is what the similar equivalent would be in the United States. Others say don't have one at all. So getting the right advice is important because now I think people are interpreting what they think the right answer should be.
It's one thing to have cross-border issues come up because you're moving to or from because of work. How does marriage complicate things? Love can complicate a lot of things. What happens if you're Canadian and you're married to an American?
Yeah, we like to say that you didn't just marry for love, you also married a tax regime. And the reason that happens is that Canadians are taxed based on their residency, whereas Americans are taxed based on their citizenship. So if somebody is American and lives in Canada, they still have to abide by all the US tax rules. And that can create some really interesting complexities that people didn't expect. One of the most common situations we see is where a husband and wife own a home together and they've had it for many years and it's appreciated in value. For the Canadian, they have the principal residence exemption, so they don't pay any taxes on the gain of the property. The American spouse, not so much. A portion of that gain might be subject to American taxation. And they should know that because they can take steps to avoid that situation. But if they only find out when they sold the property or if someone's passed away, that's not a great surprise.
You might think that you can avoid all cross-border issues if you're not an American, you're not married to an American, and you have no plans to live there. Does that mean that you don't have to consider any of these issues?
Hope that would be the case. But interestingly, if someone in their own portfolio owns more than $60,000 of what's called American situs property, so they own shares of Microsoft, NVIDIA, Apple Computer, what have you, in the non-registered account, well, when they pass away, that could be subject to the U.S. estate tax. And so if they want to take advantage of the exemptions, their estate will have to file a U.S. tax return on those assets. So even though they're not American, they may have never lived in the United States, and may never even step foot there, it's their portfolio that could cause them that challenge.
So the threshold is
$60,000.
$60,000, not even 60%.
Right.
Is that the case even if this is in a registered account?
No, RSPs fortunately have an exemption where that's not required. But it's very common that people will have more than $60,000 of U.S. securities in a portfolio when they pass away if they're older. And a lot of people don't know this. So this will be subject to their executor having to file that U.S. tax return.
Darren, thank you so much. There's so much to consider when you are talking about cross-border transactions. And if you want any information about any of the issues that might come up, you can visit portagewealth.com.